Well, Egypt's parliament has rubber-stamped constitutional amendments that could keep President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi in power for another decade. The parliament, which is dominated by Sisi's supporters, voted 531 to 22 in favour of the amendments. The measures will also give the military a more formal role in the country's politics. A referendum will be held to approve the changes within the next 30 days. Well, Dalia Fahmy is an associate professor of political science at Long Island University, and she joins us now on Skype from New Jersey. Dalia, these constitutional amendments don't just relate to presidential term limits. Are there concerns about the future role of the military and judicial independence?
Absolutely. So people are focusing right now on the fact that Sisi would be in power for another decade or so. But the critical thing is that the military would be, and I quote, there to preserve the Constitution and the democracy and to maintain the basic pillars of the state and civilian nature. What that means is that the military will have power over the state. Now, that's the first time in Egypt's modern history where the military has the formal power over the state and over the government and over the Constitution. Aside from that, the lower house that exists today would be reduced significantly by Sisi, and there would be the creation of an upper house that a third of which would be appointed by the president. So you would have a legislative body that was not just a rubber stamp, but is really in the way he wants to shape it to preserve his power. Now, the third part is that he would be in charge of the judiciary, essentially appointing judges and the public prosecutor. And he would be in charge of the role of judges in society. And so we used to look at the judiciary as the last vestige of some semblance of independence, some kind of check on the power of the executive. What these constitutional amendments do is put the executive branch, or the president, above the parliament and the judiciary, with the military solidifying power around that. Now, when we think about what constitutions are supposed to be for, constitutions are essentially the contract between the state and society, where essentially the Constitution is there to protect the rights of civilians. What this Constitution is now designed to protect is the Sisi regime, which is very different than essentially what a constitution is all about. It also removes a lot of procedural protections and checks on contracts and bidding and military role in the economy. It actually removes all of those checks. And so essentially this constitution is not just not in keeping with democracy and human rights and the root of the Arab Spring, it actually does solidify military authoritarian rule in Egypt.
Dalia, you mentioned the Arab Spring. How does this compare with the powers that Mubarak's regime held before the revolution?
This is unprecedented in Egypt's history. This is far beyond Mubarak's power. And I think the unintended consequence of what the extent of this is going to do is that we're starting to see the elements of public grievance rise to the surface. There is several movements on the ground today and in cyberspace. There is a grassroots movement called Batil, hashtag Batil, or hashtag Void in English, which has reached over 300,000 Egyptian voices saying no to the Constitution. As a result, the regime has had to shut down the website over 7 times. And just on Monday, according to NetBlocks, which monitors net activity, 34,000 websites were shut down by the regime because they don't want people voting in this online poll against the Constitution. Now, essentially what this shows is that there is a groundswell of frustration among Egyptians that if we brought down Mubarak and his authoritarianism, and now we have a constitution that is going to solidify a new kind of military dictatorship in Egypt, well, then people will respond. And the one silver lining in Sisi's overreach is that it could be this moment that returns the spirit of the revolution of January 25th.
Dalia, you're talking about this pushback from various different critics of Sisi and the corresponding crackdown. Well, last year when Sisi won by landslide, there were criticisms then of how that vote was conducted. Are there concerns about whether this referendum that's coming up will be free and fair?
Sisi has not allowed any independent oversight of this referendum. Usually elections have independent election monitors. He has refused to allow independent election monitoring of this referendum. And so we know it will be rigged, just like the last election. He won by 97% of the vote. But what this online poll is demonstrating is that there's enough groundswell saying no. And so even if this referendum vote is rigged or goes far in his favor, more so than people expect, there is this other online shadow poll that says something different. And for the first time since January 25th, we might see a response that he's really overreached. This is unprecedented in Egypt's modern history. And it's not just his power. It is the role of the military in everyday life, is the role of the military in the economy. It's the choking of the system. And he's really now bringing his two sons in to kind of solidify this power of the Sisi and his family in rule for a very long time.
Dalia, let me ask you, you're in the United States and speaking to us from New Jersey. President Trump just hosted Sisi last week. How is all of this being viewed over there?
So President Sisi's trip to the United States last week was because he really wanted that pat on the back from President Trump as he received the last time he was here, in saying that you are a great guy, you're doing a great job in lieu of everything you have to face. And President Trump delivered absolutely on that. He gave Sisi the legitimacy he wanted on the international stage. But if we take a wider look at the international arena, in January, when everyone was celebrating French President Macron's critique of Egypt's human rights record, that very same night, there were many economic agreements signed between Egypt and France. France today, for example, is the largest seller of arms to Egypt. The United States has reinstituted all $1.3 billion of aid, most of it military, to Egypt. And so the international community has taken a very large step back from the conversations about human rights and democracy. President Trump's visit with Sisi last week included no conversations of human rights and democracy, and Secretary of State Pompeo's visit earlier this year, again, no conversation on human rights and democracy. And so what that signals is that not just the international community, but primarily the United States, is not really committed to this conversation on global democracy promotion as we did in the 90s and the 80s.
Dalia Fahmy from Long Island University, thank you for your insights on Al Jazeera.